Billy Creekmore, Chapter 23. Alone in the woods, a different type of spirit comes to me. For weeks I lived in the woods, finding shelter in rundown guard stations near the switches or else under the boughs of a tree with the sheet Aunt Agnes gave me spread above. My clothes got to be all rags and dirt. Days were mostly sunshiny and still with the faint dronings of bugs in the air that can drive a body crazy. If I listened too hard, I'd start wishing I was dead, for it was an agitating sound that made me think of Uncle Jim and Clayton dying in the hollow and the evilness of the guards running through the camp with their guns. There were spirits all about, but they were ancient and proud, not the newly dead filled with yearning to find their kin. They kept their distance, and the only thing I felt from them was their indifference. I kept to move on best I could, hoping Charleston would appear soon. There were more switches than I ever thought, with tracks branching off to the northeast or southeast, as well as some that just seemed to circle back to nowhere. But where I was actually heading, I couldn't say. Nights was lonely and long, with possums and raccoons creeping through the underbrush and scaring me so I hardly slept. I don't think a human had stepped foot in those parts since the Chesapeake and Ohio first laid tracks 50 years ago. One afternoon, a grand train with 70 cars or more, loaded with coal, carrying timber and passenger cars, rumbled by. I heard it coming a mile away and saw its smoke rising above the tree line. It passed too fast for me to see the folks looking out the window, but I wondered about 'em. Where was they going, and what was they after? Was they miners or their kin? I thought about folks back in Holly Glen, and it almost tore me up not knowing how my Aunt Agnes was, or Clyde's mother, or little Belton. I wondered who'd bring Uncle Jim's and Clayton's bodies back to town for a funeral, and who would help Aunt Agnes in her grieving. Days run together, and then one morning in a wide part of the valley I came upon a string of 10 cars or more on a sliding off the main line. They was waiting to be picked up by a locomotive, I reckoned. Some were flat cars carrying the longest poles I'd ever seen, and some were box and passenger cars. All in all, it weren't like any train I'd ever seen. A few of the cars carried blue and gold wagons, and the sun picked up the glittery paint and the shine sparkled my eyes. Down yonder from the tracks off in the trees was a whole crowd of folks, some lounging on blankets in little groups here and there, and others fishing in the creek. As I got closer I could see posters with painted pictures and fancy script covering the sides of a few of the front cars. Suddenly I realized, plain as day, that it was a circus train. I got to where I could read the posters, and one of them said, "Charles Sparks, world-famous circus, now in its 30th year." I started running up to the folks under the tree, whooping hello and waving my hat to them. Some of the folks stood up with a jump, and I guess I must have looked awful wild and strange running out from the woods, my face covered in dirt and my clothes all raggedy. "Are you real circus folks?" I yelled. I was excited as could be, remembering how glorious the circus in Charleston was, and what a fine time I had with Uncle Jim and Clyde. "We sure are, son," said a man. "Who might you be, and where are you from?" He was straight and elegant as you please, with a royal-sounding voice. I guessed right away he was the ringmaster. "I'm Billy Creekmore, and I'm not from anywhere." Then, before I could think to stop myself, and probably because I hadn't had a soul to talk to in so long, the words tumbled out of me, and I told him my life story. I went on and on, not knowing what to leave out, so I didn't leave out much. I told him about my mother's death and my pa's postcards, the way Mr. Beetle beat us and how I barely escaped the glass factory. I talked about Rufus and Peggy, Aunt Agnes and Uncle Jim, Clyde Light and his little brother with his strange ways, and Clayton and the Union Man. Then how the Baldwin Felts guards shot my uncle and my friend, and how I didn't know what town they was visiting next, but they better stay clear of Holly Glen. Somewhere in the story I started crying, and it felt like my heart was breaking when I told him about my uncle, Clayton, and Clyde. Other folks had come around to listen. Some were sinewy and strong, some were beautiful as kings and queens, and others had the funniest kinds of bodies, all pear-shaped or uneven on one side. One fellow came up to my waist, tiny as could be, but muscled like a strong man. There was an oriental family of tumblers that I recognized from one of the posters, and a fat lady all soft and billowy in her flesh. All of them had kind faces. "Well, Bert, let's take 'em along," said the fat lady. Tears were streaming down her face. "Let him ballyhoo to earn his keep till we teach him an act or give him a trade, but don't leave the poor little orphan behind." Others took up the cry, and it warn't no time at all before Bert said all right. It was fine by him, for they could use another boy posting bills, 'cause it was too much work for the one little guy they had. Bert gave me a clean cloth and told me to go rinse off by the creek. Then he gave me some clean overalls to put on. Other folks shared their lunch with me. It was cold fried chicken and pickled eggs, and I think I shocked everyone with how quick I gobbled it up. Before long, a locomotive came by on the main track. It slowed to a stop just where the siding meets the main track. Someone ran down to wake up the trainmaster, who was still sleeping under a tree, and soon enough the engineer and him was shaking hands and saying howdy-do and thanks for coming along. A band of men hooked up the circus train to the locomotive and double-checked everything before we set off. I sat in the passenger car in a little sliver of a space next to the fat lady. Her name was Darla, and wasn't it a wonder, she said, that I lived in the woods for so long without a grown-up, and wouldn't I like life in the circus so much more? Sure I will, I said. Back in Charleston I saw the Frederick Ainsworth Circus in a show about King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and there was the most daring trick riders, just as elegant and carefree as can be. And did your pockets get picked? And was you shortchanged at the ticket booth? Did folks living nearby get their wash tags stole right off their clotheslines? For I've heard terrible things about that circus, filled with scoundrels and thieves, what they say. A regular con man's show. Oh no, I said. Nothing like that happened. And no, it was a right spectacle, ever so glorious, set back in ancient Egypt times, and... That's all right. I don't want to hear it, Darla said, fluttering her hand in the air like she was warding off a swarm of flies. Mr. Ainsworth's got a low-class show, not a thing like ours, and we don't and don't he treat his folks bad? Why, you just ask Mr. Paul Wenzel, who conducts the clown band. He used to do the same for Mr. Ainsworth, and don't he have plenty of stories to tell? I felt awful worried that I made her cross, so I did my best to make things better. Oh, well, the clown's was just awful, and so was the trapeze artist. He fell down a dozen times or more, then the fire eater near burned off a lady's hair. This pleased her considerable. She looked out the window, happy as pie to hear all the things that went wrong. Oh, you'll like it with us, she said, smiling. It's a Sunday-type show, clean as can be, entertaining the folks with spectacles and feats without cheating a soul. And Mr. Sparks loves us like family, feeds us like family, too, and you'll have a family with us if you want. Didn't Mr. Sparks take on that other little boy? Of course he did. You'll meet Mr. Sparks soon. He's with the advance crew in Huntington, meeting the mayor and fixing our parade route through town. Oh, he's a wonderful man. She went on and on, chattering away, till all of a sudden she fell asleep, just like that, her head knocking the window with every little bump on the rails, and her great body sliding across the seat and shoving me into the aisle. Did she faint? I asked the man sitting across from her. No, that's just Darla's way of falling asleep. She's resting up for the parade and tonight's show. Come on and sit here, there's a space for you. And so I sat next to Jimmy Carroll, who played trombone in the big show band with his pa and near 20 other fellas. He was born in the very train we was on and had worked the Sparks Circus all his life. Seemed like he loved talking, too. I tried paying attention, but my mind drifted back to Holly Glen. I could see Aunt Agnes stoking the fire alone in the cabin. Of all the women she helped in their grieving, I wondered which one was with her now.